Hey, welcome to the fourth and final webinar in the Structured for Scale series. Marcus is here and I'm Rachel, usually in the background. So we are probably starting now a minute or so late because I'm not typically the presenter, but that's okay. So welcome everyone who is here, and we are going to get started.
Yeah, and just so you know, thanks for tracking along with us on this series. But then also today, Amy McCarty, who's usually on these, she's actually on site and traveling today. So Rachel and I are holding it down, team of two versus the team of three. So getting through it, and then we were ready to present this, and then the internet went down at our home office, AT&T outage in the area. So we had to quickly pivot to a space that we're not used to, and that's where we're here today. So thanks for tagging along. Rachel, you may want to change your camera just a little bit to get onto you straight.
Perfect.
And then we're ready to go. So as people are coming in, good to see everybody. This will be the last installment in this series, and we're going to have this this presentation be an opportunity to ask questions of us. So if you've got questions about Team of Three that we haven't covered in the first three sessions and you were attending those, please let us know and we'll answer those as we get to them or we have time. But then also if there's any gaps in what we present today, we have plenty of time for questions both throughout and at the end. So we want to make sure that we hit on all of those. So Rachel, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, and then we'll get into some of the CPE requirements and things like that. Obviously, you know the two of us. So Rachel Dillon is the firm administrator for Dillon Business Advisors, DBA. Myself, Marcus Dillon, I'm the founder and president. So we'll go through just the CPE qualifications. Obviously, you have a handout. We'll incorporate some polls today as well as have opportunity for questions, but then also the survey.
So on those handouts, there's one if you want to look ahead. The handouts are the full presentation. So if you want to take notes directly on those, you can go ahead and grab that, download it now. And then also a handout that we're going to share and will also be available in resources after the fact. So just so you know, there are two in there today. Objectives for today. So this is, again, if this is your first webinar with us, there are 3 additional webinars that go with this series, and this is kind of the culminating factor of how to execute and implement. So we're going to go through assigning clients to the designated teams of 3, creating a plan to introduce the team of 3 to clients, and then implementing regular check-ins with the team of 3 regarding those assigned clients. So if you feel like there are gaps, definitely go back and watch or listen to those previous webinars. So here they are. We have gone through the team of 3 overview. We've talked about the financial advantages of the team of 3, and then we actually spent a good amount of time, a full webinar on the roles and responsibilities of each person within that team of 3. We'll touch on that starting us off today just to make sure everybody understands the 3 positions and kind of what those are about before we get started with implementing and executing with a team of 3.
All right, so if you followed us up to this point, you know what this looks like. This is what we would call a full pod. It does have teams of 3 in it. So the teams of 3 are obviously made up of the CSM, the client controller, and the client CFO. As we have it here, this is what we would define as like a full pod. So a CFO leading 2 client controllers, and then each of those client controllers leading client service managers or client CSMs. And then what we've learned over this journey is while you could have a full pod and you may think, hey, I'm just going to let one CFO kind of work with multiple CSMs and multiple client controllers and build the team out, you may have too much variation in teams as you go and as you build. So that's something we learned along the way, and we like to have one client service manager work with one client controller. That one client controller works with one CFO, and we don't try to cross-contaminate pods, if you will, just because we want to make sure that the team of 3 is knowing their client really, really well, but then also The client controller knows what's in care of the client service managers, and they know exactly how much work is on their plate. They don't second guess if they're working on somebody else's clients or anything like that. So it's just helped us to stay within one full pod. And this representation is what you would think about whenever you think of a full pod.
Yeah, really helps the client controller and the CFO help CSMs prioritize work when they're working more directly with 1 to 2 people rather than working with everybody potentially in the team.
Yeah.
All right, so just again, this is just a review. That client service manager really deals with the present. They're doing bank and credit card transactions. They are running payroll if it's a payroll client. They are preparing sales tax. They are usually in communication with a client every week or every other week, just as far as like clarifications or answering questions, something like that. Definitely have the most contact with clients. The client controller is in charge of, we say the past, but really because they are going to be in charge of tax. So tax projections, tax planning, tax questions, tax preparation, tax review, as well as reviewing the financial statements every single month before they go out to the client, recording commentary over those financial statements with just highlights of what's presented in those financial statements. So they may be comparing that to the previous month, the previous quarter, or maybe even year over year, depending on the cyclical nature of the industry that they're working on. Yeah. And then client CFO, Marcus, I'll let you talk about since you hold that down.
Yeah, so client CFO, obviously you manage the entire team. So if you think back to that previous slide, there was a lot of different humans involved, not even taking into account clients. So both client controller and client CFO are leaders of the pod, leaders of people, both internally and externally. So client CFO is really focused on the future. They are taking the data, the financials, the tax work, and helping advise the client on what may be coming down the road, looking back to see this is what the last season taught us. How do we not go through that again? So you're really guiding the client. That's where advisory typically happens. In between client controller and client CFO is where FP&A exists. So some of the financial planning and analysis both kind of happens at the controller and then passes over to the CFO. And I know a lot of people are familiar with FP&A work. That CFO really takes those financials that are coming from the controller, kind of adds additional to them, whether it be dashboards, different KPIs and reporting, things like that, as you're building out projections for the future. And you're also intimately involved in the client relationship. Obviously, you're touching on different aspects, maybe that you may have a client service manager involved in and a client controller. You're there to know ultimately what's going on. And within the team of 3, you're also the person that they may go to for a judgment call. Whether it's we're up to this point and we are 96% of the way through with the financials, what do you think? Do we go ahead and issue those? So you are that person that could make that call to give confidence to the other members of the team. So you're looking at it from both an internal care and an external advising lens when you are that CFO.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, again, super quick overview, but if you need additional information about each of these 3 positions or roles within the team of 3, there are additional resources to help with that. We are going to go to our first poll.
The polls are obviously required for CPE, and then if you're paying attention and tracking along, obviously this is helpful for us to continue to guide this conversation today as well.
All right, so I think you guys can see that poll because people are answering it, even though I can't see that poll. But looking to see, can you create 1 or more teams of 3 with the current team members that you have?
Yeah. So as answers are coming in, we're going to give people a little bit more time to respond, but it looks like about 50% are saying no, there are gaps in skill set we need to fill, which is good to know. About a third of you said we have the right people, and then about 14-15% of you said we're already structured this way. So that's great. And 0 of you are saying, no, I don't think this approach will work. So you're at the right webinar, so we can talk through this. So, but there is the result of the poll. So I think the gaps in skill set, we can talk a little bit about that too, Rachel, as we go through, because that's really important. As we've made this transition, we have been very mindful of the team that we've had and want to fit the team member into a certain role that makes sense. So as we define the roles, we also assess the skill sets of the team members to see where they would best fit. And I know that talking with other firms that are interested in this model, they question how they're going to have that conversation with someone who may fit more of a CSM role, but they're doing more controller responsibilities today. And with humans, you have to have conversation and relationship, and so it's no different in placing people in these clearly defined roles.
Absolutely. And so because we are talking about implementation, and because this could be a change, it could be a small change or it could be a big change within your firm, we always want to talk through the best way to make changes with a team, or change management, if you will. And we think that the best way is to communicate early and often, and always leave that door open. And some of the things, and this was from a podcast way back when, but Elena, one of our client controllers, she really hit it on the head when she said, we need to know what's changing, what's staying the same, and how does that impact that person individually. So what does it mean for me? So those are kind of 3 questions that we really want to answer anytime that we're implementing any sort of change. And so why are we changing roles, titles, and the structure of our team? We've listed a few. So client experience is huge, but maybe not as important to team members. Less overtime would be important to team members for sure. Internal support, meaning that they have a client controller that knows specifically about that client. They don't have to talk in generalities when they're trying to get help, or that person doesn't have to spend a lot of time trying to learn the nuances of that specific client. Increased firm value, because obviously as the owner or as a leader, you're going to be able to delegate and kind of duplicate, increase some capacity as well. Clarity on individual responsibilities, and then a path for career development. And that one's huge as far as retaining and attracting talent, but mostly retaining talent. You don't want someone to have to look outside of your firm for additional opportunities. And this gives a real clear path of how to continue to progress within their career.
Yeah, and we're real fortunate to have great relationships with our team members, and just like Elena, she was able to state that, and not be worried about what we thought of those comments, because we're very open about knowing what others are thinking. So a lot of times, whenever you're over analyzing things in your head, you're placing conversations that may never exist, and kind of always thinking through the what ifs of your team, especially shaking things up like this for the better of the firm, the better of your business, the better of your team and clients. So every single one of these, each of these 6 responses are what we've seen, and what we believe that you would see as well, and firming up the structure within your firm. And each one of these is important in their own regard. You may have team members that care more about one of these over the rest of the 5 or 2 or 3. So as Rachel said, client experience is at the heart of everything we do. We want to make sure that we have great client experience. So that should be the ultimate driving factor on some of this, but ultimately it is, how do you support your team as they serve your clients? And I think that is what we tried to answer and lay it out in a way that it made sense and gave people clarity on what their responsibilities were. So obviously the individual responsibilities, and then also the team responsibilities. How are we going to deliver this service or this product on a timely, financially relevant, and overall good service to the client that's raising their hand for that? So all good stuff, but hopefully you feel armed whenever you do think through those questions of why. here are 6 easy answers to go to that team member or team members and say, this is why we think we need to make this shift.
Yeah. So assuming that we understand the roles of client service manager, client controller, and client CFO, we have, all of us in our firm, we have clients that we already have, and then we're going to accept new clients into a client advisory and accounting model. So just putting that out there, when we talk about the team of 3, that is for the client accounting and advisory services. That is for the bookkeeping, the payroll, the tax advisory, all of it, not necessarily just for a tax preparation. So I don't know that it would make sense to have all of those roles, all of those levels. You probably could. Tax returns may need to definitely sit at a minimum price point if you're having, you know, all the hands touch it. So just making sure that we do preface that the team of 3 is for client accounting and advisory services. So the first thing, what we have found the best way to assign clients to team members is to look at expertise and experience of the individual team members or the team of 3 as a whole, as we're deciding on that. And so, Marcus, do you want to talk a little bit about how, like, specific examples of how we've actually chosen clients and matched them up with teams of 3?
Yeah, so I think at this point, you've already identified which of your team members existing or team members that you've gone and found and hired, what levels they are. So this happens after you've defined that team of 3. So you've got your client service manager, you've got your client controller, and your client CFO in place. And then maybe you also have these clients that they're legacy clients, or they've opted into a pseudo CAS model, or just are spread out between how the team is serving them. So what's really helpful is once you start to define individual industries, niche specialties that you want to serve, the teams of 3 are great ways to identify how you're going to assign those clients into those teams. And we had to do this. We, as mentioned, we just started filling teams of 3, their workload based on availability, which could be good, but we wanted more strategy into how we did that. And so we did a reorganization early last year, and it gave us an opportunity to align industries within teams of 3. So if we had a dental client that was being served by a CSM who had no other dental clients, then we were going to kind of get that and port them over into the team of 3 that had the majority of the dental clients, and even make that one dental team of 3. So you look at expertise, you look at skill set of your team members, and probably what I would say there, you've already looked at the skill set of team members to kind of put them in the right roles and responsibilities. Maybe you've had discussions with them about how much they want to work or what their outlook is for their career during this season of life. And so we constantly have those conversations where we know someone could ultimately fit, maybe even all the way up to a CFO role, but for this season of life and where their family is, they're okay staying at a CSM level and holding it down really well. So I think those are the things that go into this, and it is an art form because you are dealing with people both internally and externally. Whenever we assigned clients into the teams of 3 based on expertise, it was always because we knew on the other side of that assignment, that team of 3 would serve them better going forward because of the industry expertise that they had. So we did that in a way where we didn't want to change the whole team. So we would try to only change one person on that team of 3 between the CFO, controller, CSM, but sometimes you had to change 2. Sometimes you had to introduce a whole new CFO. So be careful on how much you change, because the clients ultimately want consistency in the team that's serving them. And after you get through that, that's whenever the team really starts to see industries as a whole and know those industries well, client to client.
Yeah, so a few things. We aligned teams based on industry. So we do serve a majority of doctors, dentists, and vets. So we do have a team of 3 that is more vet and medical specific, and then a team of 3 that is more dental specific. We also looked at prior experience outside of DBA. So one of our newest client service managers, Alina, and Hannah, they both came from a firm that did a lot of retail. They actually did grocery store chains. So as we have a new prospect that we're talking to that has a business that has some similarities to retail, then we're already thinking, okay, Hannah or Alina and their team of 3 would be perfect for this because they have a lot of experience with a lot of transactions and different pieces that go with that business and that industry. Other things that we've looked at is how strong in tax our controllers are and how complex the business's tax returns or other investments that they maybe are part of. Maybe it's not their core business that's so complex, but maybe they have their hand in a lot of things that does increase the complexity. Then we also would look at that before deciding on a team of 3. Let's say if there was no vertical or industry specific, or if you only serve one industry, which kudos maybe to you for that, then those are some other considerations when you're looking at experience and expertise. So not necessarily just experience that they've had in your firm, but even experience they had prior to that they could use that knowledge to serve those clients.
Yeah, and I would say, how did we know, other than the interview process, what their previous experience was, what industries they had?
Yeah, the interview process was a lot of it. We get to know people as well as they're being onboarded, but a lot in that interview process, we are asking really specific questions and even have them do oftentimes a quiz, like a little accounting quiz to kind of check skills on that. So it's very short, I would say very basic and simple, but just to make sure that it's not a I've seen this or I've been in QuickBooks to receive payments, but that I've actually done accounting and bookkeeping prior to coming on the team.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to knowing your people, knowing their skill set, maybe even knowing their desires. If they want to go serve a certain niche industry or anything like that, you would kind of pair that with the clients or the prospects that you have when making these decisions. The last thing I would say about expertise and how to assign the work that you have coming in or that you already have is we've gotten to that point in our firm, we can't accept any work that maybe our weakest person, and I say that not as an insult, it's really we have to train up people. We're not going to accept work that our weakest person can't handle. So I know that as firm owners, we always say, hey, this prospect's a little bit complex, but this person probably already overloaded would be a great fit for them and they know how to work through this complexity stuff. Or even I, as a firm owner, can handle this. Stop doing that, because what you're doing then is you're bringing in work that only a few people on your team can handle and not the majority of your team. So definitely look at the base level of team members, what can be handled by them. And if it's too complex, pass on the engagement. There's enough work out there.
Yeah, that's good. So the next way that we would look at after we've looked at experience and expertise, another way that we originally started aligning clients with teams of 3 was last year's experience or prior year's experience. So looking at, same as last year, who has worked on this client multiple times and has some sort of relationship or a good relationship already with the client. So very familiar potentially if this client was going from an annual only relationship into a monthly advisory and accounting relationship, potentially we're looking at, okay, can we put someone they're already familiar with on the team from both directions that are familiar with that account into that team of 3 to serve that client. So that's another possibility of how to assign clients.
Yeah, and I would say out of the 3 that we're going to cover here on this slide, this is the second best, right? So you've kind of maybe don't have capacity for expertise, the person that you ultimately think may serve them the best. That next best person is somebody that has worked on them in the past. And even thinking back when we were tax heavy and kind of ran the firm that way, it was always best if the same preparer could pull that return year over year, as opposed to just based on kind of first in, first out, or whatever you want to think through, just because you build up knowledge about that family, about that business that is useful year over year. And so you are able to identify if they turned on a new service line or had a new kid So I think those are the things that all of that knowledge exists in all of our firms, but we're so quick to write it off because we just think that first in, first out may be the best method. And we may actually put the client in a worse position because we've passed on either expertise given their industry or their situation, or who's worked on them in the past and just has knowledge of the client relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last would be capacity. And so we've already talked, if we're ranking these in order, we're going in order of best case to use sparingly, as far as just assigning based on capacity and availability. So once clients are assigned, maybe you have a handful of, we'll call them misfits, not in a negative way, but they just don't align with somebody has worked on the, the person maybe is no longer with the team that has worked on them always, or potentially this isn't an industry that's in your niche, but it fit as a client, the person that you accepted fits within your ideal client. And so if you have a handful of, let's say, misfits that don't have a home or team to go to, then looking at availability. Potentially, once you've identified, looking at capacity as you start getting new clients and teams are starting to reach their limit, that might be a time that you look at that. But this, I would say, is the one that we look at least often, is assigning a new client based on just who has availability.
Yeah, and this is specifically talking to new clients. What I would say is if you're serving legacy clients or some clients that are no longer CAS in your firm because you're looking to make that shift from legacy to more CAS or majority CAS, the clients that maybe come in once a year, this is what we saw whenever we had those annual relationships and we assigned that work based on either salary or capacity, because expertise really didn't matter. We were building out the CAS division. So salary or capacity, that capacity begins to diminish over time as your teams of three begin to fill up their plates with CAS clients. And that's what we saw. We saw that these annual business and individuals, the ones that we kept that were really good clients, they just came in at an opportune time, and somebody had to figure out how we were going to get that work done. So capacity was the ultimate deciding factor of we can no longer do this work and we have to exit this work, whether we monetize it or just exit it without any benefit. So I would pay attention to that capacity block and what you're assigning based on that alone. That also will tell you where you have gaps in your team of three, because if you're overloading a certain client controller or a client CFO just to make room for that CSM who has capacity, then we need to rethink, how that org chart works, and maybe for a season that CSM can support 2 controllers. So I think those are the things to think through, because I know a lot of people, whenever you're building this team out, maybe you've hired a CSM just for the CAS division and you're not trying to give them any other type of work. As firm owners, we see that payroll cost and we think we can assign other things to them. And I would just, encourage you to stay disciplined in that, to where this model will start to take ground. You will start to get new clients onto it, and you'll move to the expertise as being the best way to assign clients to team members.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we are ready for our next poll. Oh, let me go back. Okay. All right, launching this next poll. Which method of assigning clients is best for your firm, or maybe have you already started doing?
Just want to also say we're seeing some good questions come in, so we'll hold some of those to the end or work those in throughout. So we'll just encourage you, if you've got something already, or you want to make sure we cover something today, to go ahead and put that in the questions section and we'll get to it. So this is really useful to see because expertise in my mind, after going through all three of these different scenarios, expertise wins hands down every time for me. I've gotten in trouble assigning clients based on capacity. And so please, please, please learn from our mistakes, learn from our struggles, and try to align based on expertise or Sally first. I think the other piece with capacity that we look at is being very, as mentioned, disciplined in your client roster, your client list, making sure you're grading throughout the life cycle of your firm, making sure that you're only doing the work that makes sense for where you're at today and where you're going, not where you've been. So I think every time that we've gotten into a situation with team member capacity, whenever we've blocked and exited clients, immediately we had available capacity to do some of the expertise alignment or just previous relationship knowledge alignment for client service work. So that weaves into this completely based on our story and where I think a lot of firms are today.
Yeah. All right, so once we have aligned the clients internally, so decided on teams of 3 who those will be, decided which expertise and experience they have and which clients are going to who, then we need to introduce the team of 3 to clients, because potentially this is either 3 new people that they've never worked with, or maybe an additional person that they haven't met before. And so we want to make sure that they understand, the client understands also why we're doing it, and then as well who these people are and what they're responsible for. The biggest question is always, who do I contact? If I have all 3 of these people, who's my main point of contact, or who do I always contact? And so, Marcus, what do we tell them whenever they ask who is their main point of contact?
Their team of 3, just depending on the situation. So you have to educate, right? And I know a lot of firms try to do a good job throughout the sales process or even the onboarding process, but what we're seeing, what we've learned is those handoffs internally have to be on point from sales to onboarding to service. And even how you have that kickoff call with the clients to introduce them to their team of 3, because Rachel, you take point on a lot of the sales conversations. I'm also involved to a certain extent, but you definitely, but I may not be involved in client service after sales either. So I think making sure that the client knows at the beginning of the relationship and has a visual of who they are reaching out to and for what is very important.
Yeah, so what we've created is giving them a visual, so a 1-pager handout with a picture of each of the 3 team members that are going to serve them, the role and the responsibility of each of those. And this is actually the handout if you haven't grabbed it from the handout section in the webinar. But this is actually a page from our Getting Started guide that we give to every new client. Once a client signs the engagement letter with us, I will send them an email with their Getting Started guide attached. There is a lot of information in there to help set expectations, introduce the team, and kind of give them a timeline of what onboarding looks like. But the most important part is really to introduce the people. It also buys us a little bit of time from the signed engagement letter till we actually do have that kickoff call, and lets the client feel like they're getting something, we're doing something. There's just more communication, and it doesn't just stop or drop off after I've probably been talking to them a whole lot. We don't want there to be just dead space for too long before we start their service. So definitely want a good first impression. So this is one of the pages from that Getting Started guide, and it outlines, again, their picture and their name, their role, and then gives like a brief overview of the responsibilities for each person. That can help the client decide if they have a tax question, who to send that to, if they have a question about a refinance or hiring an associate or making someone a partner, who to reach out to. So all of those things. But typically what we like to do is say, you could email anyone on your team of 3, or you could always email your whole team of 3, but the appropriate person's going to respond, and you're going to get the answer, whether it's a team effort coming up with that answer and sending it, but we just like to keep everybody in the loop.
Yeah, and once you've identified who their team is and who they should go to for any given area, it cuts down on some of maybe the owners getting brought into conversations that you're just going to delegate anyway, or maybe Rachel as sales and firm administration being brought back into something that you're just going to forward anyway. So it leaves the clients better educated after they do sign, after you do start having those conversations. And then once you have the kickoff call where you're actually introducing yourself, each different role to the client to just kick it off and create a good relationship from the start. What could happen before then is if they have some immediate questions, whether it's tax related or business related, that client controller, that client CFO could also kind of jump in. We've done that a lot of times just to make sure that the client has confidence going into this new relationship. Obviously, they've just ACH'd a lot of money to us between the first month and the onboarding fee. So we want to make sure that they feel confident and that the relationship starts off right. And sometimes, most of the time, they come to the firm with questions, immediate questions that need answering.
Yeah. So we have this one pager. It is pretty much a template. All that needs to be changed out is the picture and the name. So making sure that if you have both male and females in there, that the language is just neutral and doesn't reference maybe pronouns, probably easier anyway. But that the paragraphs don't change at all. The only thing that changes is the picture and the name. So it makes it super easy to prepare that before it goes out to the client.
And I would encourage you, I know some people get weird about pictures and team members and everything like that, but I would encourage you to use pictures, or if, there's plenty of filters out there. You don't have to catfish anybody, but if you want to do a caricature or something like that, just to bring out your individual, unique personality and who that client's going to be working with on an ongoing basis. We are all small firms. Nobody on this call is a corporation, and that's who your ideal clients are doing business with. So they want to get to know you. A picture allows them to connect that much faster and have a deeper relationship going forward.
Yeah, and I think psychology says people are nicer when they realize it's a human that they're dealing with and talking to. A lot of times our interactions are email or messaging and not face-to-face, and maybe not even video or phone call. And so having that human element also helps them to realize that they're interacting with a real person, and it may help with how they communicate and expectations of that person, right? It just brings a human element. So after the one pager is created, we have found email works just fine to introduce that team of 3. We don't have to have them come in office. We don't have to schedule a meeting with every single client that they're getting this new team of 3. An email works just fine to attach that one pager and say, in the body of the email, the reasons that this is beneficial for the client. Again, what's changing, what's staying the same, and how does it impact that person individually? There are a ton of benefits to the client of having the team of 3. Marcus, you want to run through those, or I can run through those, but just
go ahead.
2 or 3. Okay, 2 or 3 benefits for the client specifically is no disruption in service. They get quicker answers, and then also just the knowledge of the team, the collective expertise and experience of the team instead of just that of one person. For example, in our team, if someone went out on maternity leave, they definitely have 2 other experts on their account that is going to step in. If somebody's out sick or out with a sick kid, there's 2 other people that can answer immediately. We don't have to say, oh, sorry, you'll have to wait until such and such date when that person gets back. Typically, we can get all client needs, questions taken care of, as well as just get deliverables and things out at the same time. The client doesn't even know that there's a disruption. So a lot of benefits for the client experience. Sometimes, I think it's equal almost to what's internal benefits. So.
Yeah, and it is definitely that team approach. The success of the client relationship is really on that team fully. So like you said, if a CSM goes out, the other 2 pick up the slack. And we do have, we employ a lot of working parents. Most all but me are female, obviously. So maternities are a very real thing. We've actually got 2 team members that are about to go out and have children and celebrate all of that comes with that. So we know that's coming, and we are preparing for that in each of those different teams. And so how we're working through that with each of those CSMs, both of them are CSMs, is we're making sure that we've got the right coverage in place. So if there was available capacity within that same pod, we don't try to go across pod, we try to stay within pod. And if another CSM that works with that same controller has available capacity to help for that 3 months, then we ask them first. That's a good option. We have great communication with the client to know what's happening. Our team even gets gifts from the clients because they're so excited about that new baby or whatever is going on. So I think those are the things that you plan for and try to go around. Now, if you don't have available capacity, and maybe even in sometimes the client controller is just okay picking up the slack and just knocking it out for a season, or depending on how long it is. So I think that's really an option. We just want the team to decide what their best route to go is for full client service. And then the other person on the team that we have this year is we actually have a pod assistant, and that person is a TOA employee, and they also work behind the scenes to help out as much as they can to support the CSMs. So they work within the pod. Right now, they're working in between both pods, and they're just there to be a delegation source. So between the accounting assistant, the controller, the CFO, everybody feels like they're covered whenever you have somebody go out, especially in the case of maternity.
We're about to have, like you said, we're about to have 2 of our client service managers go out on maternity leave. They will overlap for just a bit during their time out. So I feel like we need to do either another webinar or maybe a podcast first on how we prepared for that. We have been preparing already for 2 months, and they don't go out till August and September. So how we started preparing for that, how we have it organized, and then maybe we wait till after they come back to let you know if it was successful or not successful. But definitely this is the best preparation for an extended absence that we've ever done, ever. So this should work out well.
Yeah.
After the emails are sent, what we recommend is to invite all members of the team of 3 to the next regularly scheduled meeting. So if there's already a meeting that's planned or on the books, or if one pops up on the calendar, in the beginning, right after those introductions have been made, go ahead and invite all members of the team of 3. While that's not like super conducive to schedules and getting other work done, it may feel expensive to have that many people in a meeting with potentially one person. It's important, and they could come for the first 5 minutes of that meeting. Just do an introduction, say hello, again, add that human element, because it is a very highly relational relationship with the client. So even just introducing them so that, for example, and this is making the assumption that there is a partner or an owner that all of the clients like to go to. They always email, and then you as the owner or leader are having to forward it out to the appropriate person to work on. So the more that you can introduce and show their team of 3 and really just kind of empower and give them authority is what it's doing when you invite those people also into the meeting.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point. So in those calls, we schedule those for about 30 minutes, those kickoff calls, and the first 5 to 10 minutes are just introductions. So in our structure, the client controller actually leads a lot of the onboarding. So onboarding is done, both client controller and client service manager kind of tag team it for the most part. So client controller, client service manager may stay on for the remainder of that call, but it allows others maybe to stay on mute, kind of, just be there, or drop altogether. So that's just something to think through whenever you look at everybody's schedule and try to figure it out, like, how are we going to make this happen? And that being said, like, sometimes if I'm the CFO, I'll schedule an additional time if I can't make the kickoff call, but that's very, very infrequent.
Yeah, and I know way back in the beginning, before we had our teams of 3, with their full client load and the clients that they serve, and just adding a new client every once in a while, anytime if you had your calendar already had meetings booked on it, you would go ahead and invite them, not necessarily tell the client, you can no longer meet with me, you have to meet with this person, or you'd say, yes, we're going to change it to your team of 3, but I'm going to join in with them. And you would go in for the first 5 or 10 minutes, again, just to make the introduction so the client doesn't feel a huge disconnect or like they've lost a piece of their connection to your firm. So I think that probably psychology and interactions with humans come into this a whole lot more being in the service-based business.
Yeah.
And then continue to include the team of 3 on all communications with the client. If you feel like they're refusing to go to anyone but you or go to the appropriate people, they keep going back to whoever their last, right, like in their inbox, like they just keep replying to some old email. Continue when you reply to put the whole team of 3 on it, or even internally, you could share the message internally and then have the appropriate team respond or the appropriate person respond. But again, it's more of you and the team staying consistent and showing what your expectations are for the client and who you expect them to go to and deal with, and then making sure that the team is fully comfortable and confident and has all the information that they need to serve them very well. It just takes a little bit of time for the client to build up trust and start going to that person. And so as much as whoever held the relationship previously can elevate the new team and show that they are trustworthy, the faster that process is going to go.
Yeah, and so this brings up a great point about communication. So within DBA, we use Teams. I know some people use Slack, but we create each leg of that team of 3 or pod-like structure. I've got a channel or a chat going with that CSM, that controller, and myself, because things come up within those clients that you serve. So that's how we communicate internally to say, oh, do you see that question come in? Like that, those are the pieces before you really have to give a response. And if you're the partner, or even in Rachel's situation, maybe you're sales, but you want to make sure that you elevate the team to be able to answer that. What I have done throughout my career and continue to do is I'll give the response, like what I think the response should be to that CSM or that controller who's going to deliver that response. I don't want it coming from me, because then the client's just going to keep coming to me for answers. So not only is it a way for you to educate and let your team know how you would respond, and then they can just do it that way from then on, but you're also painting your team member as the go-to expert for that question. So a couple different things there. So you could definitely set up different chats or channels for your teams internally, and then before the response is communicated, how do you make the team member the hero?
Yeah, I think that's a nice thing to share as well. Within our teams, each team of 3 or each client has their own little chat?
Team of 3. Yeah, clients would get overwhelming. So we do have chats going on for when we're onboarding a new client, because we do have Deidre or some administrative help in that channel, maybe even Rachel's in that channel if it's a sales handoff. So during onboarding, we have a dedicated chat for that client that's going through onboarding. And then once they flip over to service, and that leg of the pod is serving them, so to speak, those conversations happen within that chat.
Perfect. All right, time for another poll. And this is getting near the end, and then we're going to do questions. So let me launch this.
Yeah, so we've got a couple really good questions out there. We'll get to both Brian and Mike. We'll make sure to answer those. Kevin, I think we got yours. If we didn't, let us know and we can go further into it.
So asking with this, how do you currently communicate, either in mass if you were needing to send a full email to your full client list, or even in subgroups? What is your best communication platform right now?
And obviously communication is key. We just talked about some internal communication that we do here. We believe in Microsoft and Teams, even though sometimes we want to just drop it and go to Zoom or go to Slack, but we still believe in Teams, and we're excited about some of the integration of the different Microsoft products and how it works with our OneDrive SharePoint accounts. So But we are going through or went through a change on how we communicate with clients here recently. So this is good to see. Email seems to always win. The only other thing we didn't put on here was like text, I guess, because that's becoming more and more an option for clients.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And this is going to be the last portion before we get to questions. So thank you guys for hanging with us as we're going through this. Is anytime that there's a change, we started the conversation with anytime there's a change, we need to communicate and we need to let the people who are being affected know why the change is happening and how it's going to affect them. But then after we implement the change, we need to do regular check-ins. We need to check on those teams of 3 individually and see how they're doing with their newly assigned clients, just from a client and relationship standpoint, also a workload standpoint, a stress level standpoint. Maybe we have wrongly assumed or made some assumptions, either based on what we thought about the team member or what we thought about the work that was coming in. And so we have a few ways to do that. The first way, or the most often touch point, is weekly check-ins. So we do that from a survey within Teams that auto-populates every Thursday morning and closes on Saturday. And the team members are just supposed to fill it out sometime between Thursday and Friday at 1 so that I can respond. And that should take the team about 5 minutes or less. They're actually choosing an emoji to gauge their workload, stress level, morale. And then they're typing in their weekly high and weekly low. Sometimes this is related to clients and client work. A lot of times it's related to personal, which is very helpful to me if I see like a negative emoji in the stress level, and then their weekly low is personal. I know that that's impacting a little bit of their stress, is not all coming from work. And then I respond to those. So once I receive those it's just like a survey. Each team member has access to fill it out when they can, sometime between Thursday and Friday. And then I respond to those hopefully before the weekend, before Friday when everybody is off. And so they get immediate feedback. But what that has allowed, most recently, we had a team member who she had some clients that were going through some different things, and she received a new client, and the amount of work, the amount of learning, and just getting them up to speed, her workload was more than what she had committed to our team as a flexible hourly team member. And so she let me know, and we had to actually rearrange a client off of her, I guess, list of clients. And so it was 2 weeks. So we let it go 2 weeks. And then on the 3rd week, I commented every week. But by the 3rd time, I'm like, this doesn't sound like it's going to be good long term. What would you like to do? Would you like to push through, see if it gets better? Or do you think we need to move a client somewhere else? And she said she thought move a client. Like for long term, for the commitments to her family and outside of DBA, that would be better that way.
And to that point, like you gave that situation 3 weeks, 2 weeks, to kind of fill it out. The same can be said if you don't hear from a team member, they haven't filled out that like weekly survey or weekly check-in. How long or what do you do whenever someone just dismisses it and doesn't let you know how they are?
Yeah, fun fact, we've been doing the weekly check-in since 2020. So now 4 years in, that's a lot of check-ins. And so what I've noticed is our longest tenured team members do it every single week, and our newest team members do it every single week. Our ones who have started somewhere in the middle, they're usually like every other week that they'll check in, definitely if they have something really good or something really bad. But typically if it's just like not much is going on, they don't have a complaint or a celebration, they may skip it. I try to check in by that 3rd week. If I haven't heard in 2 weeks and they haven't been on vacation or sick or something like that, by the 3rd week, I'm checking in with them if it's not filled out. So just to make sure that everybody's okay and they're not using that time to apply for a job somewhere else.
Yeah, and so obviously we give folks a safe space to do that. There's not any conflict, obviously that comes to you, and you may tap me for something, but not a lot, but just we'll kind of keep that between us and then see how it goes. That next one is the biweekly check-in. So that is somebody likely on their team or in their care, and they're just checking in to see how things are going, try to build the relationship within that team or just between the two people. Just because we know when you have a friend at work, you hang around a little bit longer, you go through the ups and downs a little bit better. So we like to encourage that, even in a remote environment. That is probably even more so important. So we schedule those every 2 weeks. I think Leslie's done a great job. She'll meet with one leg of her pod on one Monday or 1 week, and then the other leg of her pod on the other week. And so she has a couple different one-on-ones, and then they actually meet whole leg of pod on that same day, just to see how things are progressing, kind of have a checkpoint in there. So both individual check-ins and then maybe even a team check-in to see what's going on with those clients that we serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last is actually a client check-in. So at least twice a year, sending some sort of survey for feedback to the clients, even just if it's a net promoter score, asking them, would you recommend us? How likely are you to recommend us to another business owner or a friend? And then why? Why did you give that rating? And so even if it's that short, sending some kind of feedback. We mentioned more recently, if you increase prices, you'll get feedback whether you wanted it or not. So if you haven't sent out something,
your survey, send a price increase. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're gonna keep going, and let's leave the next steps up here. You guys can read that on the screen, and let's answer questions since we are getting to the very end.
Brian asked a great question. What happens when one of those team members change? Just like in the situation where we had that team member, like, I think the best thing long-term, not only for me, but the client, is to change. We always look at the same pod first. We want to make sure that we keep as much consistent as possible. And so we want to stay CFO, controller, and maybe it's just a change in CSM. With that, if there's no turnover, then the transition is a little bit easier. We can do introduction to that team. I don't think we necessarily reprint or redevelop the guide, so to speak, but we can. It's just an easy changeover. Some of you may choose to do that. We don't. We just make sure that the team member is fully introduced. We have scripts because it comes up more often than you would think, whether someone's going out for a season or if things need to change based on workload and all that fun stuff. So we haven't had an issue because people see that majority of the team is still in place, and they, in the situation where turnover exists, they still know that every business is going to have turnover, and they just give us the benefit of the doubt that majority of that team is staying in place, and we're still going to fully serve them for that season.
Yeah, business owners, as far as our clients, have been really kind, and they're usually say they're glad that it's you having the turnover rather than them having the turnover. So they're usually very understanding, knowing that they're still taken care of.
Yeah, if you're involved in their payroll process, it's one of those things where it's like, you can't tell me anything about what turnover looks like because I see how often you're onboarding and offboarding team members. So just once you have those relationships with clients, you can poke fun at one another. It's pretty good. And then the last thing is just questions on how to get the other series, the other webinars that were before this one, as far as the Team of 3 series. All of that lives out there on DBA Firm resources. Those webinars are there, additional podcasts, different resources like the Team of 3 resource or job descriptions. I was talking to a firm, I think last week, and they went and hired somebody, and they just totally took that and made it their own and gave them the first 90 days of what that looks like for that new team member. So that's what we want. We want to share these resources. We want them to you to use them in your firms to make your life easier, because if we develop it, we believe in it enough to release it. We want to make sure that you're good to use it as well.
Yeah.
And then kind of that last thing, once you get in there, you see all the fun stuff and are in the know, so to speak. You're an insider on what we're releasing, what we're continuing to build. So some of those are the upcoming webinars. Those, I believe, you can go ahead and go out there and register. So time blocking is pretty important as it relates to the team of 3. Client list, always a fun conversation. And then building and pricing. So that kind of leads right into that season when if you wait to Q4 to price, or you do that in Q1, it's always good. And then in November, we're going to be getting together again in the Woodlands, Texas. So you'll see all of that out there if you're in resources. And I don't know if you've waited too long like me and learned that QB Connect is already sold out. If you're planning to travel that time of year, come on down to the Woodlands. We'd love to have you because QB Connect is sold out and you can't go now. So all that fun stuff, would love to see y'all if it makes sense. But definitely if you aren't in resources, go out there, and there's a lot of good things waiting for you.
Yeah, so we will get CPE certificates out within 48 hours. So hopefully sooner than later. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. You can get to the YouTube either directly from YouTube at Dillon Business Advisors, or you can just go to the resources page and there's a link out to the webinar. So you can find all of them there, including this one. So thank you guys for being here. If we didn't get to all of your questions and I see it, I will email you personally the answer to your question. So we will get all those questions answered for sure for you.
All right, guys, have a great afternoon, good weekend. We'll see you soon.